Hey friends, hi. My name is Tony Martin. As always, anarchist, teacher, activist, musician. I'm here. This is episode 4 of Post Hardcore History. Today we're going to talk about redlining. Redlining is a super loaded concept, but essentially today we're going to boil down the idea about the concept of wealth and how wealth is part of the systemic racism that non-white people face in America and have pretty much forever. As always, I'll have my sources in the comments. You can look at those. These videos, as always, aren't going to be perfect. I'm going to do the best I can to make sure that these are truthful and pertinent and relevant, because redlining is still, unfortunately, very relevant. So let me give you a little bit of backstory on redlining. So it's incredibly difficult to go back and trace the roots of informal redlining in practice, but the legal precedent is clear as day. It starts with the Great Depression. Well, it starts with the New Deal. This is where redlining really formally begins, and it's an important lesson for us all to know. Even, my most liberal friends, people will always talk about FDR's New Deal and his ability to pull us out of the Great Depression, but no one ever really looks at the New Deal with a critical lens, especially in school textbooks. Trust me, there are plenty of people that are analyzing these things in the way that they should be, but most textbooks don't really talk about redlining because it's just kind of a byproduct of the New Deal. So let's be real, when we're looking at the New Deal, white supremacy has always been the core of this country's policies, regardless of if it's economic, social, geographical, political. Even if the law is supposed to benefit everyone, white supremacy will have the power to pervert those intentions. This story is a reflection on redlining and also a call to awareness to the viewers of this video. Policy does not end white supremacy. It doesn't. Just like redlining contributed to segregation, so does Brown vs. Board from 1954. So essentially the theme of this talk today is going to be the old cliche, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So, of all the different organizations, programs, and initiatives put forth in FDR's New Deal, the Public Works Administration and the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which is now known as the FHA, or Federal Housing Administration, are the ones at the root of this redlining. The PWA was tasked with creating low-income housing, and it did. These public housing projects were created but segregated even ideologically with their construction, because some of these public housing units were created specifically for black families or non-white families, and then certain units or projects were also designed specifically for white families. This in of itself is not super surprising. Jim Crow is still the law of the land. It's still a little surprising to know that some of these racial lines and neighborhoods are actually separated by large physical walls in a lot of the cities. The one in Detroit actually still stands today, so if you're ever up in Detroit, you can go see the segregation wall. It's referred to as either 8 Mile Wall, the Burwood Wall, or the Wailing Wall. It's real. It's still up. The effects of these policies, the visual reminders of these policies, still exist. So we've got these segregated homes. And before we move on to how money was allocated by the FHA for individual borrowers, I'd like to make a very important distinction. This is not where the creation point is for high-density, low-income living facilities, but this is a new housing project system that is similar in spirit to what we knew as the slums that were in both black and immigrant communities since the urbanization of cities in America has started really picking up after the Civil War. So it's not the first, but it's part of a long tradition of poorly equipped, racially or lineage-based segregation. So let's talk about the FHA, as we call them today. The FHA was giving loans to new homeowners, regardless of credit, to remove a former policy that was called balloon payments. So here's an example of a balloon payment. If your house costs $15,000 in, Great Depression times, you'd pay a couple hundred a month for a few years, and then you'd have one last massive payment. So it'd be you pay a couple $100 a month, and then your last payment would be $4,000, $5,000. So the thought was you would be saving up to make this large payment over the years, since you weren't paying as much on your loans. So when the Depression hit and all these payments came due, people would lose the homes that they sunk years into, thousands of dollars into, because they couldn't afford to make that last balloon payment. Oh, yeah, by the way, they're going to start passing these loans for you to be able to refinance your homes, and black people weren't allowed to apply for these loans at all. They also weren't allowed to refinance. They weren't allowed to get these new loans for new purchases. The FHA would build certain homes and then construct certain neighborhoods for different races, and it's in the manual. It's in the underwriting manual. Only people of the intended race were allowed to live in these newly constructed or available homes. So you've got these low interest loans to help remove all the foreclosures, and then you've got the building of public works, of public buildings, low income housing, both of which are not provided with any equity in terms of the populations that they're given to. So the New Deal and the FHA sent people out to go map each city. If you Google pretty much any city plus the word redlining, you can see yours. Each neighborhood area was color coded, and banks would use these colors to determine if they would give a loan for houses located in a certain area. They would use the jobs, the incomes of the people already living there. You would look at their access to amenities, the view, access to public services. The four colors were green, blue, yellow, and red. People living in red line neighborhoods were denied the opportunity to get these loans. And I bet you can guess what all these neighborhoods had in common. I don't even really need to say it. Let me just emphasize, though, if a neighborhood was 99% white, it would still be redlined. Even if it was one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in an area, if there were black people in it, redlined. Look at Cicero. If you live outside of Chicago, the neighborhood of Cicero should be a perfect example. Oak Park, Austin, all those collar counties. Story for another day. Speaking of, the Root, I'm going to link this in the show notes. It's going to be the first link in the sources. The Root's redlining video on YouTube, outstanding. Can't recommend it enough. They do such a good job. So when we're looking at why redlining, I want to talk about why this isn't covered in history books. It's pretty complicated, which is fair, but also because the repercussions aren't as focused on a few select dates for it to be something that's easily tested on in most classrooms. But let's take a look at what these formalized segregation and loan policies left as a legacy. Wait, hang on. Did I say legacy? Oh, no, sorry. This is still happening today. Predatory loans, racism within the process of getting a loan. Banks are still getting sued constantly for these practices. A lot of these formerly redlined neighborhoods are still effectively redlined today. Houses in these neighborhoods are still worth less, they're still hyper-segregated, and they're still deteriorating. It's kind of like all that loan money might have helped fix up some of those places and communities over the last 90 years, but I'm not a city planner. These formerly redlined communities also still feature schools that are chronically underfunded, neighborhoods that are food deserts, and such a low resale market that a lot of homes will go abandoned or sit on the market for years, decades, until some white folks want to start a punk space or a craft brew house in a cheap part of town, not recognizing that doing that is recolonizing an area that was abandoned because of white supremacy. I'm just saying. So, take a second. First off, think about all the DIY spots you've played in bad neighborhoods and just think about that as recolonization. Okay. Think about what wealth actually means for a second, and think about the generations of inherited wealth that white people have that we've had the opportunity to accumulate over the decades. So let me give you an example. My mom has almost paid off our townhouse that she got in the mid-90s. If that's paid off and then she kicks the bucket, that shit goes to me. I can sell that if I choose. I could go live there if I wanted to. You know the kind of freedom that gives me? I could pay off my student loans. I could put a down payment on a house that isn't in the armpit of the Northwest Illinois suburbs, Chicago, whatever. Generations of non-white families with the same age as me, same level of education as me, same careers as me, they don't have those opportunities because of these policies that started so far ago. Now, these aspects of the New Deal are part of the genesis of the suburbs, speaking of the armpit of the Illinois suburbs. So you combine the redlining of the New Deal with the GI Bill, and you're going to create white flight. And this is where the creation of the suburbs comes from. Segregated neighborhoods soon turned into almost entirely segregated cities, and the white families made their way to the burbs in response. Similarly to when Brown versus Board passed in 1954 and desegregated public schools, future episode, White families moved their kids out to suburbs far enough away so that public busing would prevent them from ever having to share a classroom with a black child. Ew. So, what did we learn today? Well, first, sorry, I gotta write better. First, redlining was the policy of not giving low-interest housing loans to black Americans, and formerly redlined neighborhoods are still predominantly non-white and still some of the lowest funded in the nation. I should probably just hold it like this going forward. So, lastly, how will this knowledge make me a better ally? Well, everyone's got that uncle, right? Holidays are coming up in a few months. Maybe you'll Zoom your Thanksgiving, whatever. If you've got that uncle that always says something racist during the holidays, just hit him with the redlining. Why are so many non-white people living in bad neighborhoods? What's up with the educational achievement gap? Why are there such high crime rates in Englewood? Redlining has limited the potential for non-white people to get ahead in life simply because of where they're born. And yes, I am 100% aware that your racist family member will never listen to you, never hear you out. But just remember, when you're dunking on them in front of everybody, maybe your cousin or your siblings or your parent will hear it and it'll help them understand. I'd rather you explain it to them than Ben Shapiro, and Lord knows your family member is constantly barraging them with these crazy conspiracy videos. Did I say barrage? I meant barrage. My apologies. Redlining is very rarely taught in history class. It's not in textbooks. It's not on most curriculum. Lots of us don't know about it. Hopefully you can share this knowledge that you have with them. Knowledge is power, and I honestly believe that. So, thank you so much for watching. It's 4 episodes in. I can't believe I'm doing this. It's still really weird, but I can't believe even more you're watching it. It's like the biggest honor of all time that you would let me talk at you for 12 to 14 minutes at a time. I don't really care about liking, sharing, subscribing. It's cool that you do. That's awesome. But as long as you watch it and teach and learn, that's really all that matters. Just remember that all these problems that are systemic and super deep in this culture are never really going to go away until we get rid of capitalism and toxic masculinity. Have a good one.